America's infrastructure is collapsing. We've had some shocking glimpses. The levees in New Orleans, the interstate bridge that went down in Minneapolis, the massive East Coast blackout of 2003.
Imagine a month-long blackout. Imagine major failures of water delivery system in the West. Imagine levee breakdowns that can't be repaired.
We're headed down the road, without much exaggeration, to being a second world or a third world country.
This is the United States of America. Why is our infrastructure in such bad shape?
Infrastructure. It's so intrinsic to society that we never think about it, the way we never think about the bones in our body until they start to break.
Mesopotamia, the Incas, the Indus Valley, all of those societies started with dikes and levees and agriculture and roads, and without that, humans would never have risen above the hunter-gatherer status.
Bad things happen when an empire allows its infrastructure to decline.
When we look at Rome as a great civilization, a big part of what made it so great was the infrastructure, the road systems, the bridges, the aqueducts. As the Romans started to neglect that investment, it crumbled and collapsed, and we ended up with the Dark Ages.
From the 1930s to the 1960s, the United States built the greatest infrastructure the world had ever seen, and it played a critical role in our rise as a superpower. That whole build-out is reaching the end of its life cycle and groaning under loads it was never supposed to handle. Design flaws, not enough money, normal corrosion, and decades of deferred maintenance have conspired to break America's infrastructure down.
We Americans today have been a lot like a generation who's inherited our grandparents' mansion. You know, people are driving by going, nice house. But when you go inside it, it's falling apart.
And this morning, sources tell CBS News the Department of Transportation will release a 400-page report today on America's aging infrastructure. The DOT is worried about potential disasters similar to major bridge failures in Washington state and Minnesota. The study highlights a record-setting $86 billion backlog of transit repair projects. Jeff Pegues is at New York's Crumbling Tappan Zee Bridge over the Hudson River. Jeff, good morning.
Good morning, Nora and Anthony, and good morning to our viewers out west. That is the Tappan Zee Bridge behind me, one of the most heavily traveled spans in the country. It was built in 1955, built to last 50 years. But even though that 50 years has expired, it's still in use and routinely dropping chunks of concrete into the river below.
Every day, 180,000 cars and trucks use this 17-mile stretch of Interstate 95 in Philadelphia.
So we shouldn't be hearing that sound.
We should not be hearing that sound. That sound means
decay.
That this is a structure that needs to ultimately be replaced.
The Pennsylvania Department of Transportation says it will cost nearly $1 billion to repair, 90% of that from the federal government. SEPTA, the city's massive transit system, is having its own problems. This 91-year-old bridge can literally be chipped away with a hammer. Should it be falling off so easily?
No, it's not a good situation. And basically, like I said, the water is moving through the structure.
As the nation's aging infrastructure starts to break down, federal funding is falling behind. Secretary of Transportation Anthony Foxx.
It's a termite in the basement problem. It's literally years and years of slow, steady deterioration in our infrastructure and poor maintenance.
The Department of Transportation estimates that the U.S. needs to spend at least $124 billion a year to keep roads and bridges in good condition. In 2010, all levels of government combined only spent $100 billion, $24 billion short. The Obama administration has called for more infrastructure investment, but any new spending will have a tough time getting through the current gridlocked Congress, especially in an election year.
It's not going to happen just because Washington divides it. It's going to happen because the people of America demand to have a 21st century transportation system.
In Philadelphia, SEPTA would like to update some of its equipment from the turn of the last century.
I know you were shocked when you first came in. It looks kind of like something Frankenstein had in his basement.
This equipment has been powering the trains continuously since the 1930s. Operators are worried it will stop working if they turn it off. The new bridge to replace the Tappan Zee Bridge is under construction. It's expected to open in 2016 and be completed by 2018. Nora and Anthony?
All right, great reporting, Jeff Begay.
Roads and bridges are vital to the country. The ability to freely move goods, services, and people across our nation directly contributes to our economic place in the world.
There's no question we're not making adequate investments in our transportation infrastructure. It's more expensive today to maintain what we have than it was to build it originally.
We're still driving on roads that my grandparents paid for and built. Our average bridge age is 75 years. Well, they were built to be 50-year bridges. One bridge that carries 90,000 cars a day. The nearest detour is an 11-mile detour. So if that bridge had to shut down, we'd be looking at 1 million miles a day of extra traffic while that bridge was shut down and being rebuilt.
The majority of our population lives in metropolitan areas, so our highways are greatly congested.
When you have congestion problems, time is money. And that's money lost to that business that is trying to get their product to the marketplace. Same thing for a business person whose time is very valuable.
We all work somewhere, and all of those jobs are dependent on that infrastructure working for us.
We need to make some more investments for the future. We have to look at the whole problem.
We have been working for many, many years, over a decade, in a realignment of our major interstate I-40, to bring down the current long structure of a bridge down to street level, to turn that into a boulevard. And of course, the other side of that coin is if you don't invest in your infrastructure, and you do have bad roads, and you do have bad bridges, it doesn't help you with economic development.
Maintenance is a very important part of our roads and our bridges. Maintenance can extend the life of our roads and bridges, and lack of maintenance can actually shorten the life of these structures.
It's important that a state has a plan of action, has timetables, has measurable results, puts the funding behind it to take care of their infrastructure.
This is an investment for us and your children and your grandchildren, because that's what your grandparents did and your parents did. Investing in infrastructure is extremely important if we want to continue to be economically successful.
Infrastructure is vitally important to our economy. We have to be able to move people and to move goods, and if we're unable to do that, then our state will suffer as well as our nation.
The state of our infrastructure is poor and getting worse.
The situation's so dire that the American Society of Civil Engineers has given the infrastructure you rely on in this country a near-failing grade of D.
Is it dangerous?
In some places, in some situations, it is.
Deadly dangerous?
Dangerous to the extent that we are facing other I-35Ws, like the bridge that collapsed in Minnesota in August of 2007.
That bridge was considered structurally deficient, and shockingly, so are 70,000 others across the country.
You can see where the crack is starting, and as it gets pushed more and more, it'll fall down into the river.
American Society of Civil Engineers Andy Herman showed me firsthand what a bridge with that rating looks like.
I'm not an engineer. As a novice, I look at this and I think this looks really bad. Is it?
Well, the bridge has been posted, so they've done structural ratings on it and found that it can't carry what it was originally designed for, so they posted it for smaller trucks, less weight.
If heavier trucks come across this bridge, what could happen?
It starts wearing the bridge out even faster.
CNBC takes a hard look at the country's crumbling highways, bridges, and levees.
Could the catastrophe in Minneapolis happen again?
Go inside the search for answers in the race to rebuild America's infrastructure.
Sanders is on the Senate Committee for Environment and Public Works and the Budget Committee. Senator Sanders, thank you for being with us tonight.
Great to be with you.
So, why aren't we?
Well, the answer is pretty simple. Everything you said is true. Everybody knows you have to invest in infrastructure. We can create millions of decent paying jobs in the long term, and I speak as a former mayor. You obviously save money because you don't have to do constant repairs, as we've just seen. The simple reason is, I'm afraid, that you have a Republican mindset that says, let's see, we can repair the infrastructure, save money long time, create millions of jobs. Bad idea. Barack Obama will look good. And we have got to do everything that we can to make Barack Obama look bad. So, despite the fact that we had a modest bipartisan transportation bill, roads, bridges, public transit, passed the Senate with over 70 votes, Inhofe, the most conservative guy in the Senate, working with Barbara Boxer, one of the most progressive, we can't get that bill moving in the House of Representatives. So if you're asking me why, I would say 100% political. If it's good for America, if it creates jobs, if it's good for Barack Obama, we can't do it.
Now, some Republicans say, and some people say, didn't we do infrastructure a couple years ago? You heard a lot in the stimulus that we had done infrastructure. So how come we have all of this outstanding infrastructure?
Because we have ignored infrastructural needs for a very, very long time. Yeah, we did put money in infrastructure. We put it into the state of Vermont, put more money into roads and bridges, but we need a lot more, and that's true for the other 49 states as well. We have, and it's not only roads, it's not only bridges, it's not only water systems, it's mass transportation. It is rail. China is building high-speed rail all over the place. We are not. Our rail system is in many ways deteriorating. We have schools that are aging. We have culverts that need work. We have tunnels that need work. We have an enormous amount of work that is ready to go right now, and it is beyond comprehension that our Republican friends will not support infrastructure legislation.
Now, one of the things that I think people sometimes miss in the infrastructure conversation is that for the last couple of years, we used to do infrastructure bills for many years at a time, 5 years, 6 years, something like that. For the last couple of years, we have passed 9 short-term bills in Congress. Instead of one, the Inhofe-Boxer bill is only 2 years, but that's longer than a couple of months. And that's meant, as I understand it, states and localities can't plan future and bigger infrastructure projects because they don't know what the federal government will or won't be doing in a couple months, making essentially every dollar we're spending on infrastructure now less effective because people can't plan for the future around it.
That's absolutely. And I'll tell you something. Every day that we delay right now getting this modest transportation bill done is a serious problem because we're in the state of Vermont, you don't do roads in January and February. We do them in the summertime. And the construction companies need to know that they're ready to go, and they need to know it now.
One of the things that we used to do in infrastructure, and that I know is holding up the surface transportation bill in some ways, is we had a gas tax for it. It was a tax on gasoline. Ronald Reagan raised it by a nickel when he invested in infrastructure. And one thing that's been remarkable to me in this conversation the last couple of years, just showing how far both parties have moved right on the tax issue, is that even Democrats refuse to broach the idea of a gas tax. And with that not even on the table anymore, I do wonder where we're going to be funding it in a sustained way going forward.
Well, that's a good question. I'm not a great fan of the gas tax because I come from a rural state. You got a lot of people traveling long distances to work, and they're making $10 an hour. But we're living in a country right now with the most unequal distribution of income and wealth. The wealthiest people paying the lowest effective tax rates in decades. There are ways to raise money to create jobs and rebuilding our infrastructure without doing it in a regressive way, in my view.
Senator Bernie Sanders, thank you so much for being around tonight.
Despite the U.S. economy recovering, it's still facing major stumbling blocks to growth. One of the country's most influential engineering societies says America's infrastructure is falling apart. Now, if you drive or fly or take the train, you know what we're talking about. I looked into this issue and found America's infrastructure problem isn't just about roads and bridges. It needs money. American highways were once the envy of the world. The same was true for U.S. railroads, schools, and drinking water. Not anymore. According to the American Society of Civil Engineers, using an American grading system where an A is the highest mark and a D the lowest, the U.S. was near the bottom in 9 out of 16 categories. The country earned a D in aviation, a D for dams. What about hazardous waste? A D. American roads also got a D, and so did U.S. schools. The Society says upgrading America's infrastructure to a B by the year 2020 will cost the country $3.6 trillion. But It will be money well spent, according to U.S. President Barack Obama, who says federal rebuilding projects will put Americans back to work.
It is important for us to make sure that we're rebuilding the infrastructure of this nation. We could be putting people back to work right now, increasing the growth of the economy, reducing unemployment.
A special commission appointed by Obama's predecessor, George W. Bush, issued a report urging the U.S. Congress to allocate as much as $9 billion a year to upgrade America's national railway, better known as Amtrak.
Amtrak ridership in 9 of the last 10 years set records. So the public is saying we want more trains. They're riding trains wherever you give them decent, even half-decent service.
On hold, plans to upgrade Washington's historic Union Station that serves 100,000 passengers a day. The upgrade would triple its capacity and make it the main hub for high-speed travel in the Northeast. But Congress is in cost-cutting mode, leaving infrastructure projects stalled, while politicians argue whether austerity or stimulus is better for the economy.